All right, Travis Hall, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you grew up in Indiana, got a degree in journalism. Was outdoor writing kind of the focus of that? Is that what you wanted to go into?
Yeah, I'd say that that's kind of what drew me into writing in the first place. I was always a big reader of hunting and fishing magazines like Field Stream and Outdoor Life growing up, and had a little bit of a knack for writing, and thought that might be a good way to try to make a career in the outdoors.
Hmm. When you were in high school, was that kind of the plan too, or was it something that kind of developed in college?
I would say like senior year of high school is when it kind of got on my radar and became a goal. So yeah, and then just kinda went from there.
I got a lot of high school students who are trying to figure out what college to go to and what to major in. I'm like, hey, you got a 4 year buffer now to kind of figure that stuff out. So you don't have to know exact path. A lot of people change their major. A lot of people get careers in fields that aren't related to their major, but by going through the process, learning skills, looking at opportunities and taking advantage of them, like that's how things end up. It's not because you had a great plan as a 17-year-old. That's why things worked out and that's why you're happy.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's just a matter of, setting a goal, pursuing some objectives and getting experience and kinda going from there. I learned more about writing and reporting on the job than I ever did in college, at a fledgling journalism program.
Mhm. What was some of your first stories or first opportunities you have? Like usually there's a first story that's in like the deep recess of the journalist's filing cabinet that you don't really want to remember the terrible interview or the mistakes you made. But how was that start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I kinda started at a daily newspaper in Western North Carolina. There's actually 2 different newspapers that I worked for, they were super small community newspapers, and I would work for one day and then, travel across this valley and work for another one. But that was my first real journalism gig, I guess. But as far as, getting into, like, the hunting and fishing space, I did some freelancing long after that for Meat Eater, just through connections that I'd developed, and some of those early stories were some of them were conservation based and other ones were just, chasing down clickbait for lack of a better word. So if there's something in the recesses there that you don't necessarily wanna tout all the time, it was kinda chasing some of that more clickbait internet friendly stuff that really broke me into the hunting and fishing writing that I wanted to do on a broader scale.
It kind of seems like there's maybe three main arms. There's the experience, the participatory. I went out and I shot this buck. I got this deer. I got this, whatever. And then there's the clickbaity, whatever. And then there's the conservation type. Have you done kind of all three? And or maybe did you start with the I went out hunting, this is my experience, and then kind of get into the conservation, or was conservation kind of the main goal right off the bat?
I think by the time I got into hunting and fishing writing, conservation was really the main goal. So, conservation news was what I honed in on, and a lot of that in the early days there was just local stuff. I just moved out to Montana. So, I was writing stuff about our Fish and Game Commission out here and, changes that were happening and opposition to those changes or support for those changes, and just interviewing as many people as I could to try to get a unique perspective, a unique voice in there, because a lot of times you're competing with 4 or 5 different outlets that are gonna publish something in the same vein. So I think a big factor was being able to bring that, those original interviews to kinda distinguish yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with any of those 3, and sometimes it's nice to be able to write any of those 3, and a lot of times a good conservation article becomes kind of clickbaity, so it doesn't mean that there's necessarily a hierarchy, or because you don't write about conservation, that doesn't mean that your stories about hunting, fishing, outdoors are too bland. It's kinda nice to be able to have a topic and then kind of which way is this story best going to be told, and it's kind of fun to be a diverse writer rather than just pigeonhole yourself.
Right, definitely. Yeah, and, sometimes you have to revert to that clickbaity type of headline writing just to get people to read it, if it is a conservation topic that some people might, kinda overlook otherwise, that can come in handy.
Yeah, last summer was kind of big for that because it was such a big potential threat that there had to be an element of that clickbait and there had to be that sense of urgency that came out. So last summer's kind of high watermark as far as unification of hunters and anglers to beat back the bad bill that was going to take a lot of lands. Do you think that's sustainable, or do you think that the politicians are going to go back to the drawing board and figure out a better way to maybe circumvent the voters, or what do you think going forward is going to be the result of that?
Yeah, yeah, it's a tricky question because, whether or not it's sustainable is kinda dependent on all of us as American citizens and, how aware we remain in the face of all these threats. I would say that the politicians went right back to their tricks almost immediately and haven't stopped since, and have probably only doubled down more since last June, when that budget bill that you're referencing and it went through the House and then the Senate and it ultimately failed, would have sold off like 3 million acres of public land. But I mean, the message was sent loud and clear that people don't want that, voters don't want that to happen. But uh, politicians like Mike Lee out of Utah, they're still at it. They've just, they're resorting to kind of trickier ways to do that now.
Mhm.
And it's, that's a challenge for writers in conveying exactly what they're doing and like the mechanisms, like the mundane legislative maneuvers that they're now using to do that. But yet that threat hasn't even begun to go away, I would say.
Yeah, that would necessitate people admitting that they had a bad idea or that it was a loss. That's kind of the unfortunate thing with you get so many or you get so much information about all these bad things that are happening around the country, it can just feel completely overwhelming. Or because boundary waters aren't in Alaska, why should I care? But then you should care about the Ambler Road. It can be unifying, but also overwhelming in the amount of things. So
Yeah.
when you're talking to people, whether they be fellow journalists or kind of people who are doing boots on the ground, or the common person, like how do you convey the overall importance and why people should care about things outside of their own state?
Yeah, I mean, that can be tricky for sure, and the onslaught of the threats that we're facing is definitely overwhelming. I mean, even for me as a journalist, I try to stay abreast of this stuff probably more than, your typical reader would, but for me, it's overwhelming. What I try to do is just hone in on whatever I can in the moment, and I think to answer your question, it's kind of conveying the importance of a place. For me at Field and Stream, we're obviously speaking to hunters and anglers. So, if it's the boundary waters, you kind of describe that place to people and what it is, what stake we have in that as American citizens who own that federally managed land collectively, and kind of painting a picture of what we stand to lose when something like a foreign owned copper mine goes through in a place like that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of disingenuous for people to think that like the conservationists or outdoor hunters, anglers, users, that we're indistinguishable from a hard preservationist or environmentalist who, doesn't think that we should ever scrape the ground for anything and that we can just generate power by good thoughts. That's not it at all, but we get lumped into that stuff. And we're not saying that there's not a place for logging, there's not a place for mining, things like that. we have to have those sort of things, but a bad idea is a bad idea, and so we're just trying to look at different opportunities we might have, and let's have a nuanced conversation. Do you think a lot of the people that you talk to and interview are open to nuanced conversations, or do you see a lot of just partisanship that's very difficult to break through?
A lot of the people that I talk to are very open to it because I tend to, interview people that work for conservation organizations, hunters and anglers that are really invested in these public land spaces. So, yeah, when it comes to the people that I'm interviewing for my stories, I would say they're some of the most open-minded when it comes to that. You know, when you're engaging with people, after the story gets published that might have a different opinion, that can be a different story. But I think you just have to kind of meet people where they are and, make an attempt to not let the conversation or the debate devolve into something that's not constructive.
Mhm. How do you handle that in the era of social media? There's so much that you see it and it's like, "Oh, this is right on," or like following people on the other side so you kinda get an idea of what they're arguing and what the argument looks like and where the holes might be, that way you can specifically address that, but, how does social media impact, I guess, how you approach the conversations, and then does it impact how you write things or how you communicate things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it impacts the way I'm writing things. I don't know if I'm like really thinking about social media as I'm writing these articles, but when if you want to make the choice to engage afterwards once the story is up and you know there's a bunch of comments and people have different opinions, you can, go in there and try to try to talk to people and like I said, just meet people where they are and try to convince them or, just bring the facts that you have to the conversation in a way that isn't just meaningless, just chatter, which tends to happen so much in those comment sections.
Yeah. Do you go in the comments much? There's 2 schools of thought. There's or maybe multiple schools of thought, but don't listen to the comments at all, don't read them, don't whatever, pay attention. Others are limited engagement with maybe the ones that make the most sense, and others are attempting to engage fully in multiple conversations. What approach do you take? And it could be different maybe if someone comments on an article on Field and Stream versus social media.
Yeah, I would say limited engagement with the things that seem to make sense or, or seem to be like good faith commenters. I'll go in there sometimes and comment. Try not to shy away completely from that because there are good constructive conversations that can come from that if you're willing to wade into those waters sometimes.
Yeah, there are some people who kind of approach it, and you can sense that they're worth kind of talking to, and sometimes in a private message, sometimes that's a nice way to do it. Other times, it makes it look like you're trying to own them, and so they can get defensive. But there's a lot of
Yeah,
people, Alaskans, we get our perm fund checks, but we don't know where that money comes from, or we think
right.
that oil prices are up. Oh, that means that all of our worries are gone. Our oil production isn't the main driver of our economy. Our financial issues come from or our financial money comes from the perm fund that was set up in the '70s with the oil. So it's the interest off that we are able to function as a state, and oil production is a lesser part of that, and some people have no clue, and they don't know where the perm fund comes from, and they think we spend it down to 0, and so it's, this is how things work, and then people are like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." Or the fact that logging costs the taxpayers millions of dollars because the timber sales that we do don't end up making money. The roads that the taxpayers have to pay to access the timber sale is like we're paid for. The timber company doesn't have to pay for that road to get back there to harvest that. And a lot of people don't know that. It doesn't mean again we shouldn't log. It just means that before you vote for, to rescind the roadless rule, here's some information. If you still think that, you can think that, but at least go into it with a lot of information.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's why it can be valuable to engage in those conversations. Obviously, that requires both uh, parties having an open mind and not just wanting to own the other and just win the debate. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance that can be injected there, like you're saying with the roadless rule. I feel like it gets a bad rap just because of the name. maybe the name is a misnomer or a little bit misleading. People think they're going to get extended access into some of these more remote areas. They don't realize that there's there's a good chance that roads already do exist here. We're just, just saying maybe don't build more roads because it doesn't make good economic sense.
Mhm. And then the facts about the fires that was like 80% of forest fires happen within a mile or 2 of the road. So you put in more roads, that's not going to prevent forest fires. That's going to access areas to get more forest fires in there. And then here in Southeast, I think there's written down somewhere, but there have been 47 exemptions to the roadless rule. Actually, not even exemptions. It's you wanna put in a hard rock underground mine, makes sense, okay, you can build a road for that, so that's been allowed, and same thing with hydroelectric projects. So it's not an end all be all, it's reasonable, so there's really no reason to do that. I think the roadless rule has a nice alliteration to it, so maybe that's why they named it that, but like you said,
Right.
not a an absolute rule that no roads will be built, but it's a conversation a lot of people have been having, but a lot of people might not know that, so
Yeah, definitely. And so the roadless rule is it really impacts you guys in Southeast, right? Like the Tongass is probably has some of most of the largest amount of roadless area in the national forest system. Or
yeah, it's have you been up here?
I haven't, no.
It's so awesome, and there are some great access points that you just take an old logging road to access the Alpine, and so a lot of stuff has been grown in because it was logged in the '80s or something like that, or even '90s, and so you got alders growing in the road, but you can make it through sometimes with a four-wheeler, sometimes not,
Mhm.
and then you can get to the Alpine and deer hunt and goat hunt, and it's super cool, but, those roads can't be maintained because the Forest Service backlog of the roads, and so they shut down or they water bar the roads because they built the road for logging, but there's no money to keep them updated. And then the second growth is not great habitat. You lose your carrying capacity for the animals. But yeah, it's such a cool landscape, and it's great to be back here, and some of the old growth areas are just awesome. You got to come up. Have you been to Alaska at all?
I've never been to Alaska,
Oh
no.
man.
I'll be up there this August though,
Okay.
first.
Deer?
Looking forward to that. Sorry?
Are you going for deer?
No, I'm going for a trip through, hunters and angler American Hunters and Anglers, and we're gonna be up in that area of the proposed Ambler Road.
Okay.
So just I think we'll be doing a lot of fishing, but just an opportunity to get eyes on that area because 'cause I've done a lot of, backseat reporting about that, but obviously never been there, so it'll be great to get to see it all.
Yeah, when I was, growing up, I didn't really have any idea, didn't really care a whole lot about the economics of everything and the resources. I just knew we got the perm fund check, we had oil money, everything was pretty good, but now you look at the proposals going forward and see that, all right, we're trying to recreate the economy of the '70s and '80s, and that's not coming back. And the Ambler Road would be so different because you're not piping the ore, you'd be trucking the ore. So the truck traffic would be substantial and you'd have the fugitive dust that contaminates the areas. But there is a part of that, Alaskans think, well, I can't even get back there. So if I can't get back there, what's the problem with helping out the economy? If we get more money for schools, then, let's build the road, let's get the money from the ore. But it's not quite that easy. But that is that's an attitude that people have.
Yeah. So the big difference with the Dalton Highway, I guess, is like you were saying, that's a pipeline road, right? So there's not a lot of industrial mining traffic that goes on there as it
Yeah,
sits.
you got the trucks that are going up there for the infrastructure on the pipeline itself.
Mm,
But the Ambler Road would be, was it 311 miles or something like that? And
so
and you'd be trucking the ore out to the Dalton Highway and then south to Fairbanks, then putting it on a train. So there'd just be hundreds of miles of driving the ore plus the support traffic. So the Dalton Highway gets a fair amount of traffic and a lot of hunting traffic, but it's still pretty remote and wild. Like you're just on this road and the Brooks Range is spectacular. It's absolutely incredible, and I do imagine going taking that left and going towards Kotzebue, but then it's like, why? Have you read, John McPhee's book, Coming Into the Country?
Yeah, yeah, it's been a while, but I haven't read that one.
Yeah, I was just rereading it, and he has it's there's kind of the assumption that he is making in the '70s that at some point there's gonna be a road that spurs off the Hall Road that would end up in the Kotzebue area, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
happened. There was an element of restraint there, but it's kinda crazy to think about stuff we're having the same conversations now that we were 50, 60 years ago, so I guess it's kind of, I guess, refreshing that this isn't a new problem, that there's been enough restraint, there's been enough victories to where we've been able to have resource development, but also not completely ruin the resources, uh,
Mhm.
but also we have all that information, like, why would we risk it? Is it worth the risk? It's not going anywhere. Is this the absolute, we have to do it now because we have no other alternatives? Um,
Right,
I'm not so sure about that.
right. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I'm excited to get up there and kinda see that country and get a lay of the land, but it sounds like just pristine, untouched wilderness, at least in that area where the proposed Ambler Road would go through, so it'd be a shame to see an industrial mine road like that, and would it would it provide public access for recreation, or would it just be, like, strictly industrial?
People are saying that similar to the Dalton Highway, that was originally just for the Hall Road, and there was no public access, but because public funds were used on it, it was eventually opened up, and they've been able to coexist. It hasn't been a security threat. I think someone at some point maybe tried to shoot the pipeline, but you haven't had, you know, in the 45 years that it's been up, you haven't had spills, you haven't had problems with that. The road to Ambler would be because you have the ore trucks on there, and because there's a significant amount of traffic that, it would be kept private. So some people would be okay with the road as long as it was open to the public, because if
Mhm.
you're gonna access it, then, at least as a local, well, I'm in Southeast, so I wouldn't be able to drive there, but if you do live in Fairbanks, or you do live in one of those areas and you did wanna drive out there, then you could. So I could see that point. It'd be similar to the Hall Road, but again, you're not the 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 Hall Road is a maintenance road for the pipeline and drive stuff up there to support the infrastructure that's up there. You're not trucking out the oil.
Right,
So the
right.
amount of trucks that are gonna be on that road or would be on that road would make it pretty unsafe with just the traffic and then the pollution. You don't have oil leaching out of the pipeline, but you would have that fugitive dust that's coming out of the trucks that's gonna be polluting that. So
Mhm.
it's not an apples to apples comparison like people wanna make it.
Right.
But yeah, I'd like to get up there too and float some of those rivers and just fish for grayling and char, and I've caught grayling before, but there's just something about getting to that new area and seeing it, and it's just so open, and there's not, when you're in the lower 48, you get to places where people consider middle of nowhere, but there's gonna be a plane that you see in the sky. There's gonna be, something that you hear off in the distance. There's a community or there's lights or there's something. So just be that remote and that alone, you just it's kind of like claustrophobic, which is weird because it's completely open, but yeah, you're gonna
Right.
love it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a rare experience, I'm sure.
Are you gonna fly fish or spin cast fish, or do you get to fish?
Yeah, we're definitely gonna fish from what I understand, and I'm not sure if it'll be conventional tackle, fly fishing, or a mixture of both. Definitely be open to either or.
What do you prefer?
I like fly fishing, that's probably my preference.
Yeah.
Um,
Dry fly for grayling. If you really want the experience, if you really want it that, then you gotta do that. Dry fly
yeah,
for grayling.
yeah, yeah, if I get the opportunity, I'll definitely do that. We actually have here where I'm in, Montana's Bitterroot Valley, and we have this little alpine lake not too far from where I'm at on national forest land that is stocked with grayling, and, obviously, that's gonna be a much different experience, but that was the first time I'd ever fished for grayling up in that little lake and with fly fishing gear. It was pretty fun, man. they're very willing to take a fly, to take a drive.
Yeah, yeah, they're spunky and they're beautiful. The mouths are gross. Like, I don't like sucker fish and just kinda having that mouth a little bit just it looks a little different, but for the grayling, it totally works.
Mm,
And, of course, that sail is
yeah,
crazy, but those things are
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, that big dorsal fin, that's something else.
So when you moved out to Montana, like, what was one of the main or biggest culture shock or something that you thought, "Man, I'm in Montana now. This is great."
Yeah, I don't know if I experienced culture shock moving out here. I mean, I met my wife working in Yellowstone back in 2010. I was, going to school in Indiana at the time. She was in South Carolina going to school, and it was just a summer gig. We did a few seasons of that, and then ended up moving back to South Carolina, and just always wanted to get back out west. It was just kind of in my blood ever since then. So I think it was more of just like a sense of relief and just excitement for being back out here when we moved back, and I think it was 2021. But yeah, love it out here, man. It's great.
Yeah, I went to Yellowstone a couple years ago with my wife, and it's spectacular. The lines are crazy. Trying to make a left-hand turn is just impossible. You take a right and you figure it out later, but you're not taking a left.
Oh man, it is nuts. The traffic is just really crazy. It's gotten a lot worse. I feel like a lot more popular. And it it was pretty crowded at times back in 2010, 2011 when we were working out there, but these days it's a whole different beast.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings up the just if you didn't have park service, if you didn't have recreation, then that whole area would just be ruined. But then the experience of like, it's frustrating to be in the traffic and waiting for, to get to your turn to get to the stop sign, or you're there and maybe there's no bison out, or maybe you don't end up seeing some of the stuff that you wanna see because it is pretty wild. It's not like a zoo. So it's kind of that's where we're at with some of these big places right now. If you wanna hike in Yosemite, there's only, I think, 75 permits per day to go up Half Dome, and it's a 14-mile round trip. There's just too many people, so you have to have some sort of guideline. So it's not like government overreach. It's just a lot of people want to go there and see it. That's just kind of where we are right now, and it's
Definitely.
kind of makes it tough. It's definitely worth going, but there's some places to get away, and that's kind of the cool thing. Same thing with Alaska. Like you have your hot topic places, the cool places to go to, but you know, maybe not go to the biggest attractions. Try to find something that's like I wanna say lesser, but could be equally as cool, but just not as popular.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the cool thing about Yellowstone is it's so massive and most of those tourists never get off of the Grand Loop Road there. So if you're willing to park your car and go into the backcountry for a few days, then you can still kinda get that experience
Mhm.
that
What some of
really
the
yeah.
issues in your you have some mine issues that are, happening in that area or data centers or both?
Yeah, so, I recently reported this is just a couple days ago, but so where I'm at I live in a town called Stevensville, which is just a little south of Missoula, but north of there, there's a valley called the Blackfoot Valley, and you have the Blackfoot River running through there, and it's iconic Montana trout stream. It was the setting for Norman Maclean's A River Runs Through It, but just a great trout river, great to float and or just wade fish. But there's currently a gold mine proposed for the headwaters, and that just came up, in the last couple weeks or so, and it's, familiar in the sense that it's a foreign-owned company that wants to come in and mine there, which we see a lot, just like in the Brooks or the Ambler Road there where you're at. So you have that, which is I think they're just in the exploratory phase, and that's at the headwaters, and then they wanna put an AI data center down on the lower stretches of the Blackfoot where it meets up with the Clark Fork River. So, yeah, both of those proposals have just kinda come to light in recent weeks and months. So,
Yeah, it's whenever I think about whenever we talk in, like, my classes about technology or AI, we're creating the market for these mines because we use AI, so we need the AI data center. Where do we get the minerals for that? Places like the Ambler Road because we have to mine. We're creating a massive market for this stuff, and the solution would be to not use technology so much, and it would be to not have this massive addiction to all these devices that need it. But that's modern society. It's a tough problem that needs creative solutions, and there's a lot of places that we could probably get it there would be less impact.
Right.
But then also America does it cleaner than everywhere else, and we don't use slave labor, so it's just a really I don't know, man, it's frustrating, it feels overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, it's a tough conundrum, especially when, like, when you acknowledge, like you're saying, that we use all of this technology and we're spurring it along, but at the same time, there needs to be adequate regulation for these newer industries and the older industries like mining. But when it comes to the AI, I know we've passed laws here in Montana that kind of allow these industries to skirt through the regulatory process in a way that doesn't seem right, especially for an emerging technology like this that isn't really proven. So, I mean, I think there's a right and a wrong way to do everything, and I think in recent years we've kind of been erring more on the side, or at least administrations and government. Some places have been erring more on the side of just kind of expediting this stuff, and hey, we'll deal with the ramifications later on.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of what you're seeing there on the Blackfoot too.
Yeah, it's make the money now and figure it out later, and that's the thing
Mhm.
that's I think a lot more people would be I don't wanna say completely open, but at least to listen a little bit more if you said, "Okay, this is gonna benefit you, it's not we're gonna let a foreign mining company come in here and just do whatever they're gonna do with limited local impact." They're gonna incentivize the mining and prioritize the mining company, like, to use the pipeline as an example, in the '70s when the pipeline went in, it was, "Okay, we're gonna set up this permanent fund, and money's gonna go into it, and Alaskan residents are gonna get dividend checks, and that thing is worth $80 billion right now, and the interest off that is how most of the state is funded." That was for the people, but now we're looking at these other things where it's this foreign mining company gets it, and, they're making it as appealing as possible for the company to be able to function, and the local people are not benefiting whatsoever. It's pretty messed up.
Yeah, definitely. And that's it's one of those things, it's that where journalism and just general education can come in handy because these proposals are often so fast moving. It's just getting people to slow down and realize that, while they may be on the side of development, we all understand the importance of mining for the economy and national security, but let's take a step back and realize who's actually going to benefit here. Are the American people going to benefit? Are the public land owners going to benefit, or is it, yeah, for the benefit of a foreign corporation and foreign markets? I think that tends to be the case.
Mhm. What's your favorite Montana river?
I'm kind of partial to the Bitterroot, which is right here where I live. It's a beautiful wide river flowing through a valley about 90 miles in length. Brown trout, rainbow, cutthroat, even, the forks of the Bitterroot are amazing too. You have the West Fork and the East Fork, and they're all through, national forest land with great elk hunting and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep and moose habitat. Yeah, that's probably one of my favorites, the Bitterroot.
What's the access like? Do you have it pretty easy to get on the river and fish?
Yeah, it's really easy. Highway 93 runs right through the Bitterroot Valley, and you drive down that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you're gonna see 2 or 3 different fish and wildlife river access points. So you can get on it just about anywhere. And then, when the water's up, the floating is really good too.
Yeah, that is one thing that I really like about the lower 48 is being able to drive and do floats, on different rivers. Here, you kinda have to commit, especially in Southeast where, like, you're taking a skiff ride to a river, and there's a couple of fishing spots, but it's not a huge river that drains a whole bunch of territory, so you kinda commit yourself, you go there, and then you're kinda stuck on that river, and it's awesome, like, there's rarely other people around, but, you can't just go up the river and float down, like, there's not enough infrastructure, you don't have roads, so the river floating thing is super cool, and I just think about Montana and hopper fishing and floating in that hot afternoon sun, man. I wouldn't trade fishing here for that, but man, that's definitely that's definitely up there.
Yeah, it's great, man. I mean, it's hard to beat. Yeah, especially if you're hitting that dry fly bite, like you said, with the hopper or this we have a salmon fly hatch, up on the West Fork, which I was talking about. That's just epic. Yeah, if you can hit it at the right time of year, it's really hard to beat.
What about hunting? What have you seen as far as, like, more people coming in, more out of state people looking for tags? Has your elk spot been ruined by people driving from other states?
Me personally, I can't say that it has. I mean, I'm probably one of the people contributing to ruining other people's spots, but I think there's definitely an uptick in the popularity of it for sure, and I don't know what it was like 5 or 10 years ago because I wasn't here, but I know some of the trailheads that I've been going to over the last 4 years or so have seen, steady increase in traffic, and I would imagine if you were here a decade ago, there are places that are just unrecognizable, but, it's just a matter of kinda putting in some boot leather and getting away from the crowds. Just gotta work a little harder for it, I guess.
Yeah, that's the tough part about writing in the outdoors is you don't wanna spend a thousand words talking about how terrible this thing is or this experience is or this whatever, like, this is awesome and you wanna share it with people, but you don't necessarily want them showing up to your trailhead. But
Right.
if the alternative, if we're talking about revenue that comes from, and one of the big talking points is by keeping these things pristine, it's gonna be multi-billion dollars every year indefinitely, whereas if we do a short-term mining, it's gonna be maybe millions or maybe a couple $1 billion short term for specific people. You're not gonna have that long-term revenue. So you kinda sell that and it's gonna be disrupted, but still there. Or the alternative is, foreign mining companies and the potential devastation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's tricky. You don't wanna kinda blow people's areas out of the water, but I definitely see that. If you're just hot spotting a place just for the sake of talking about how good the fishing is, that's a little different than highlighting something because it's facing a threat of, being sold off. And whenever it comes down to that, I feel like it's all bets off. We should highlight these places as much as possible so that American citizens from coast to coast understand what they have at their disposal here. If the alternative is, hey, it's gonna be transferred to the state or just sold to private interests altogether.
Mm. If you had the choice, would you read about hunting and fishing or would you watch a video on YouTube? Like, how would you rather spend if you're just gonna, like, hang out, weather is terrible and you got 12 hours? You gonna binge, YouTube videos of hunting and fishing, or are you gonna get a good book?
I'm probably gonna gravitate toward the book personally. Yeah, when I can find the time to sit down and read, that's definitely a more rewarding way of taking that and not to take anything away from all the great video content
Mhm.
that's being produced, but me personally, I would rather read something.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to actually read because I get so many ideas. You read a passage and you think, "Oh, man, that'd be a great story idea, update this," or just something to think about. It's great. Where do you usually get your writing inspiration?
I like to dip back into the Field and Stream archives, man, just because we have such a rich history going back so long. So, yeah, and then, that it allows me to kinda tailor my own writing style more toward the writing style of our past writers. But Yeah, that's one place that I like to go to.
Who's one of your favorites?
Hal Herring has always been a favorite of mine for conservation stuff, just writing in general. He's great. Eddie Nickens has written a lot of really good stuff for us. I like going back to like Ted Trueblood, who was an Idaho guy that was a kind of editor at large for us for a long. I think actually lived in New York City and worked at the Manhattan office there. But yeah, he did a lot of great conservation writing as well.
I was a huge fan of Bill Heavey. I
Oh,
was
Billy, he's great.
that
He's
back
awesome.
page calling, man. That was when I first started, because I got a degree in journalism, but I was writing sports. I was at University of Arizona, so, big sports program writing about basketball. And as I started to transition from that, Field and Stream and Bill Heavey really got me on that. Oh, you don't have to be a professional. You just have to have, just write your story. You just be honest, and it's okay to, stab yourself while you're, clipping your fingernails at an airport or something like that. It was just great. I loved his stuff.
Yeah, he's awesome, and he still writes for us from time to time too. But yeah, he's a great humor writer, and like you said, his stuff is so approachable too. It's like you don't have to be some expert outdoorsman to do outdoor writing. Just a lot of times at Field and Streams, like, can you write? Can you act? Do you actually understand the craft of writing? And that's the benchmark, and then everything else comes from there.
Yeah, I didn't hunt when I was growing up. I fished a lot, but I didn't hunt. So I had my first feeling was that I had to hunt for like 5 or 10 years in order to know what I was talking about in order to qualify for to be a writer about hunting. And he was one of the people who, as you read, think, no, that's not. You don't have to have all these trophies under your belt in order to be validated as a writer. Be able to write and communicate stories. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, he's great at that.
So, what's on your radar as far as maybe things people could be following, should be following? What's on your radar?
Oh man, so much stuff. Just trying to stay abreast of all of it. But obviously, I mentioned that Blackfoot gold mine and data center. That's one thing I've been thinking about lately. The Ambler Road where you're at is something we're always watching. And this is kind of off in the weeds a little bit, but just something to think about. It's the use of what's called the Congressional Review Act to kind of scale back protections for public land in a way that's never been done before. We're seeing that, where you're at with like the Central Yukon Resource Management Plan being kind of discarded, Bureau of Land management plans in Montana being thrown out the window with that Congressional Review Act. So that's kind of something that I'm just watching, and how people are, politicians are starting to use that in an untraditional way of dismantling public land protections. You're seeing it with the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in New Mexico as well. So that's one thing to keep an eye on.
I think Chris Wood from Trout Unlimited said it really well. He said we were kind of ignored by one party and taken for granted by the other. A lot of these things, these decisions that are being made are like, oh, people just go along with it, or they're not going to know, or they're not going to care. It's just a little bit of land here, a little bit of land here. But I mean, they're getting kind of emboldened, and it's pretty disconcerting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think some midterm elections will be good to inject a little balance into the system. I'm not saying that either either party is the champion of what hunters and anglers want to see on the land happen on the landscape. But right now, having one party that has so much control, they are very emboldened and moving really in one direction, disregarding a lot of public opposition. So I guess I have a little hope for that since those are coming up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't want a total swing to the other side. I think people just want a correction. And
Yeah,
with a lot of these things, like with Pebble Mine, there's, you know, it's never fully dead, but it does seem like people like, okay, well, that's not probably not gonna happen. The Canadian, I think it's Canadian, company is still trying to get it through, but that seems like the most common sense thing, and it seems like there was more of those issues that were kind of that, "Okay, maybe not this one," but it seems like they're really just going for anything, just seeing what they can get away with, but we'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
yeah, definitely. It would be nice to have more, true conservationists with hunting and fishing background in congressional seats. People like, Martin Heinrich out of New Mexico, Gabe Vasquez. Goes all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt and guys like that. I mean, those are hunters and anglers that really understood the value of the resources in the land, and they put common sense protections in place that people could get behind. We need more conservation-minded people in positions of power.
Yeah. More square deal rather than, pay your buddies or the people that are funding your elections.
Exactly. Yeah, less cronyism.
Yeah. So where can people go, sign up, subscribe, follow you, follow Field and Stream? What do you got there for your pitch?
Yeah, go to fieldandstream.com to kinda stay abreast of all the digital content that we're putting out on a daily basis, and there is a tab on the magazine or on the website where you can subscribe to the magazine. Just we have a print magazine again now. It was out of print for a while, but we've been back for a couple years now, and we just went from 2 issues a year to, 4, so we're quarterly now. Yeah, I'd highly recommend subscribing to that because there's a lot of really good content written and a lot of really cool illustrations. So do that. Follow Field and Stream on Instagram, Facebook. Follow me personally at Travis Hall Media on Instagram, posting my work on there pretty frequently.
And you promise to reply to every single comment that anyone ever makes, right? With a
Yeah, I
nuanced
don't know if I
response?
could that road. You know, I've recently tried to wade into those waters a little bit more, and I will reply to some, but I can't say all. No way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for being on here, really appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it, man. Have a good evening.
Thanks for listening. Please share. If you found today's conversation useful, you can go deeper with my writing on Substack. That's where I expand on these ideas from the show, share essays, reporting, and things I'm thinking about in real time. You can find it at From the 49th on Substack. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.